Hi, my name's Nevi, and my mother read my obituary while I stood outside the church, very much alive. They said I abandoned my father, left him drowning in debt. They buried my name before my body ever had the chance. But that wasn't the worst part. They planned it. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every whispered insult. And I was never supposed to walk in. But I did. Now ask yourself, what would you do if your own family tried to erase you? The wind bit through my jacket as I stood behind the iron fence, just far enough from the cemetery crowd to go unnoticed. Dry leaves scraped along the gravel paths like whispers too scared to speak up. I watched them, my family, my neighbors, my so-called friends, huddled together in coats, heads bowed. From where I stood, I could see the stone they gathered around. My name was etched into it. Nevaeh D. Burke, beloved son, 1981-2023. That birth year was mine. That full name was mine. And that headstone freshly carved, cold and final. That wasn't supposed to be mine. My stomach twisted. They actually went through with it. I whispered to no one but myself. How do you process standing in the cold, staring at your own grave while your heart is still beating in your chest? It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a prank. It was real, and it was brutal. The kind of betrayal you don't come back from. Or maybe, the kind you have to come back from. It was a Tuesday morning. And diner rush had just started to die down when Tanya, one of the waitresses I used to share night shifts with, slid a newspaper across the counter toward me. Nevaeh, this is some kind of sick joke, right? The obituary section, my face, my name, my death. I blinked hard. This can't be real. It was. They had included a small photo of me from years back, one I didn't even know existed. The write-up? Cold, unapologetic. It read like an accounting report. Debts owed. No known next of kin willing to claim the body, estranged from family. No mention of why I left. No hint that I'd gone into hiding because of a threat. That I'd disappeared to stay alive. That for 2 years I watched from afar as they moved on without me. But this, writing me off entirely, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone wanted me gone. Not missing, not silent. Dead. The church was packed. Not with mourners, but with gossip-hungry townsfolk. You could hear it in the way their voices dipped when I got close to the windows. Whispers, sniffles, performative grief. Inside, it smelled like lilies and old pews. I stayed outside, watching through the glass doors. My mother stood at the pulpit, the obituary clutched in her hands. She wasn't crying. Her voice cracked, sure. But her eyes, dry, steely. Like this was something she'd rehearsed. He left nothing but debts and shame, but we still pray for his soul. Each word dug into me like nails. Shame, debts, soul. I saw Maddox, my older brother, sitting in the front row. He was the golden boy, always had been. His suit was pressed, his tie perfect. And yet, when Mom spoke, I caught the faintest twitch in his lips, a smirk. That did it. I scanned the faces, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. Old classmates, church regulars. Some cried, but not for me. No one questioned the story. No one asked where the body was. No one wondered how a man disappears and dies without a trace. They didn't bury me. They buried my worth. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body straining to stay still. Not yet, but soon. I waited outside until the final prayer ended. People began to shuffle out. I stayed in the shadows, heart pounding. It would have been easier to disappear again. Let them think I was gone. Let them live with their version of the truth. But then I remembered. I was 5. I'd fallen off my bike, scraped up both knees. Mom didn't cradle me, didn't kiss the wounds. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Boys don't whine. They get up." Well, Mom, here I am. I pulled my coat tighter, stepped toward the church doors. My boots crunched on the gravel path. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the fury I had been storing for 2 long years. If I let this stand, they win. No more silence. The doors creaked open just as they were about to close the casket. I stepped inside. Every head turned. You forgot to bury one thing, your conscience. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman shrieked. My mother clutched her chest and collapsed. Maddox dropped his phone. Chairs scraped against the floor as people backed away from me like I was some ghost, risen from the grave. Nevia? My aunt whispered, clutching her rosary like it might protect her. I kept walking, down the center aisle, slow, steady, alive. They thought they could erase me. They thought wrong. I didn't come back from the dead to haunt them. I came back to take back what was mine. The old law office stood at the corner of Jefferson and Fifth, like a memory someone forgot to erase. Its sign read, Holbrook Jameson, Family Law. Since 1956, letters faded and flaking. The building looked tired. So did I. I showed up before the doors were even unlocked. Couldn't sleep last night anyway. I stood there on the icy sidewalk, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, rehearsing questions I wasn't sure I'd get to ask. The air was still, except for the occasional sound of a car passing, tires hissing over leftover rain. When Aunt Dorothy showed up, her keys jangling, she froze in place the second she saw me. They said you were dead, she whispered. Not even a hello. Just that. I nodded. No point in explaining. Not there. She fumbled with the lock and let me in. I walked past the dusty reception area and into the small conference room where the reading would take place. Wood panel walls, fake leather chairs, everything smelled like old paper and mildew. Maddox was the last to arrive. Slick suit, polished shoes, and trailing behind him was a younger guy in an even slicker suit. His lawyer, probably. He didn't even look my way, just took the seat at the head of the table like he owned the building, and maybe, in some way, he did now. No one asked why I was there. They just looked through me like I was trespassing on sacred ground. Mr. Holbrook shuffled in. He was older than I remembered. Shaky hands, thick glasses, hair hanging on by loyalty alone. He sat down, cleared his throat, and opened a manila folder with my father's name stamped in blue ink on the front. I sat upright, braced for something. Anything. The will began. Legal phrases stacked on top of one another, like a wall designed to keep emotions out. My name didn't come up, not once. I started to shift in my seat. Then, at the very end, as per the amendment signed on March 4th, 2023, Nevea D. Burke shall no longer be recognized as a legal heir. That sentence was a punch to the chest. My breath caught. Maddox didn't even flinch, just rested his chin on his hand like he was waiting for the meeting to end so he could go play golf. Mom sat across from me, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look up once. Not when my name was read. Not when I exhaled like the air had been knocked out of me. She just sat there. Something in me clicked. This wasn't just about money, I thought. This was personal. This was planned. I didn't care about the inheritance. I cared about being erased, about being reduced to a footnote in a family I had bled for. I made a quiet promise to myself in that moment. I won't chase the money. I'll chase the truth. Then Holbrook paused, flipped to the back page. There is one more clause, he said, an amendment signed 6 months before Mr. Burke's passing. It grants power of attorney to Maddox Burke retroactively. My head snapped up. Retroactively? Holbrook nodded. That gave him access to your father's finances, medical care, end-of-life decisions, he explained, including the authority to arrange the funeral. The walls in that room might as well have collapsed. Maddox had full control, months before Dad even died. I thought back to the last time I heard my father's voice. He'd called from the hospital, weak but lucid. We'll talk more next week, he'd said. I've got some things to straighten out. That was 7 months ago. There was no next week. Now, another thought crept in. Did Maddox do something to him? I kept my face calm, but my fists were curled under the table. Fury has a sound. It rings in your ears, just behind your eyes. The meeting ended with polite nods and legal jargon. I walked out before anyone could fake sympathy. Outside, I waited by the curb. Maddox followed a minute later, lighter in one hand, cigarette in the other. You knew I wasn't dead, I said quietly. He didn't blink, just lit the cigarette, took a long drag, then looked at me like I was a stubborn stain on his cuff. It was easier for everyone that way. That line, I'll never forget it. I wanted to hit him, scream, shake him until he admitted everything. But I didn't. That's what he expected. You always played the victim, Nevaeh. I just finished the story you started. I didn't reply, just turned and walked. My chest was tight, but not from sadness. It was purpose, cold and clear. That evening, back at the small rental I was staying in, I pulled out an old storage box of Dad's. Among the tools, old radio parts, and notebooks was a stack of cassette tapes from his shortwave hobby. One was marked in shaky handwriting, July 5th, for Nevaeh. My hand hovered over the dusty tape deck. My thumb rested on the play button. The house was silent. I pressed it. The motel room was humming. An old fluorescent light flickered overhead, fighting a losing battle against the dark. A muted TV spilled cable news nonsense I wasn't listening to. I sat at the desk, a cheap particle board slab scarred with cigarette burns, staring at the tape recorder like it might bite. I'd been sitting there a long time. The cassette lay inside, labeled in my dad's handwriting. July 5th, for Nevaeh. My thumb hovered above the play button, and I hesitated. Not because I feared what I'd hear, but because I already knew it would change everything. Click. The static hit first, then his voice cracked through like it had to claw its way out of the past. If you're hearing this, son, I guess they didn't let you say goodbye. I stopped breathing. It wasn't just the grief. It was that word, they. Not we, not the doctors, not the hospital. They. I let the tape roll, my hand trembling slightly, but my eyes fixed ahead. I didn't blink. His voice was slow, tired, but unmistakably Dad. I've been feeling boxed in these days, like I'm not supposed to think too much or talk too loud. People come and go, but no one really stays to listen. He cleared his throat. There was a long pause, like he wasn't sure if he should keep going. I know things haven't been easy between us since the lake house. I should have said something back then. I should have stood up. The lake house. I felt it like a bruise under the skin. They told me you weren't well, that you'd moved on, didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. I didn't want to believe it, but they said you'd made that choice. I sat back, the words hitting harder than I expected. But deep down, I knew better. You always were the kindest one, and that scared people. The tape clicked off. I sat in silence, letting it settle like dust. He hadn't cut me out. He'd been convinced to, lied to, isolated. I could feel it now, thread by thread, the web unraveling. I went back in time. 2 years ago, the lake house, that bonfire. The family reunion that wasn't much of one. Maddox had stood up in front of everyone, drink in hand, accusing me of stealing money from Mom's purse. Just like when we were kids, he'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I denied it. I remember looking around for backup, and Dad said nothing, just stared into the fire like it wasn't his problem. That silence had followed me for years. But now, it didn't feel like hesitation. It felt like something else. Strategy. Distance. Like someone had already started pulling him away from me. Maybe they'd been setting me up longer than I ever guessed. I opened my laptop and started pulling up old emails, texts, anything I had from Dad. I went backward, month by month. There were regular messages, photos, jokes, weather updates, until there weren't. 3 months, nothing, no replies, just silence. Aunt Dorothy had said he was on heavy medication, barely coherent. But that wasn't the man on the tape. His voice had strength. His thoughts were clear. I clicked open a file labeled Insurance June and saw something odd. A forwarded message from Maddox to Dad's nurse. Keep doses regular per our conversation. It was vague, but enough to raise a question in my mind. What if it wasn't just emotional isolation? What if it was physical, chemical? This wasn't just a family falling apart. It was a plan. And I had missed the signs while trying to survive. But now I wasn't chasing revenge. I needed medical records, dates, dosages, voices that had been shut out. Not because I wanted to win, but because I needed the truth laid bare. No more whispers, no more smirks behind suits. I closed the folder, stood to stretch. The motel chair creaked under me. Then, a knock on the door. I frowned. The front desk hadn't rung. I opened the door a crack. The motel clerk, a thin kid with tired eyes, stood there, unsure if he should speak. "There's a man downstairs asking for you. Says he's family." I stepped past him, looked down the stairwell from the second-floor walkway. Maddox was waiting. Aunt Dorothy called that morning while I was still going over Dad's tapes. Her voice was overly cheerful, like she was reading from a script. Said she wanted to host a small dinner. Just the family, to clear the air. Claimed it wasn't about the will or the funeral or what had happened at the church. Just dinner. I knew better. But I said yes. The drive over was quiet. I watched neighborhoods blur past the window. Perfect lawns, porch flags, Halloween decorations clinging to daylight. I hadn't been to Dorothy's place in years, not since Dad's retirement party. It was the kind of house that smelled like furniture polish and fake lemons, cross-stitch verses on every wall, and a flag in every room. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped. She greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted half a second too long, tight, brittle, like she wanted it to feel real but didn't have it in her. "Neva, sweetheart," she said. "You look thin." I said nothing. Her husband poked his head out from the living room, gave a half nod, and went back to his recliner. No words, just football. At the dining table, I was introduced to Cousin Janet, whom I hadn't seen since I was 15. She avoided eye contact, clinked her fork on her plate like a nervous tick. The table was full, plates polished, napkins folded tight, roast beef centered like some peace offering. But everything felt staged, too clean, too quiet. I asked once, "Where's Maddox?" Dorothy replied, "He'll be here." And right on cue, 15 minutes late, he walked in like he owned the place. Button-down shirt open at the collar, expensive watch catching the chandelier light. He didn't say hello, just pulled out the chair at the head of the table, sat down, and smiled like this was all going exactly as planned. He made a show of passing potatoes, of complimenting Dorothy's green beans, small talk that felt like a trap. Then he steered the evening where he wanted it. "So," he said, wiping his mouth, "about Dad's estate." Everyone stopped chewing. Maddox reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder, slid it across the table toward me. "Thought you should see the amended will. It's official. Dated 3 weeks before he passed." I didn't touch it, he went on. "Dad made it clear. After you disappeared, after you stopped returning his calls, skipped every holiday, he said he was done." I stared straight ahead, let him keep talking. He told me he felt betrayed. Said you never forgave him over the college mess, the debt. Said you weren't family anymore. I clenched my jaw. "He cried the day he signed that paper," Maddox added. "Said it was like losing a son twice." Gaslighting. He layered it in so smooth it would have fooled anyone listening, but I remembered Dad's voice on that tape. He hadn't sounded like a man giving up. He sounded like a man being pushed out of his own life. "Funny," I said quietly. "Considering Dad was bedridden by then, couldn't even hold a pen, let alone sign a will." That got his attention. The smirk cracked, but he recovered fast. "Hospice nurse witnessed it. We followed procedure. You were gone, Nevaeh. You chose to be." Then he pulled out a photo album. Old leather, thick pages, opened it up right there at the table, flipped through glossy pictures of Dad in bed, weak but smiling, surrounded by family, everyone but me. He pointed. "This was 2 days before he passed. He said it meant the world to him. You weren't there. Again. It wasn't just the pictures, it was the performance, the full court press to erase me." Dorothy reached for my hand. "Honey, maybe this is just what he needed at the end. Peace." Her voice cracked, not with grief, but with practiced pity. I pulled my hand away. "I heard Dad," I said, his voice, on a recording. He said he missed me, that he was misled. The room went dead silent. Maddox blinked, then laughed. "You recorded his voicemails. How sweet. I'm sure the court will love that." "No," I said. "He recorded it. For me. Before he passed. His words." That wiped the grin clean off. I stood. My chair scraped across the hardwood. "You want me erased? That's fine. But don't twist his voice. He knew. And so do I." I moved toward the front door. Nobody tried to stop me. But as I stepped outside, Maddox followed, held the door half shut behind him. He leaned in close, voice low. "Keep chasing ghosts, little brother. But be careful. Ghosts don't always stay dead." Then he shut the door. I turned back once, just to see if Dorothy would say something. She stood at the window, hands clasped, smile gone, watching. But her eyes, they weren't praying anymore. I parked outside Benji's office downtown, brick building, dusty windows, legal plaques that had seen too many years. The late afternoon sun was warm, but my insides were cold. I carried Dad's recording in one pocket and the memory of Maddox's lies in another. I needed advice, not pity. Benji met me in the lobby. He looked older, more tired, but kept his eyes sharp. He knew about Dad. We'd worked odd jobs together when I was younger, before everything broke. I pushed open the door to his office and sat down. He leaned back, listened while I laid out facts. Will amended, POA granted, funeral arranged, all without a word to me. He frowned when I mentioned they told him I was dead. Benji scratched his chin. "That's forgery risk. You have enough to demand a cease and desist. Make them account for what they've done. Publicly, if you must." His voice was calm. Mine shook, just a little. I spent the next hour gathering evidence, recordings, old emails, phone logs, putting together a folder heavy with proof of what I'd lived. Every note I read felt like light after long darkness. At 7 p.m., I sat with my laptop in a small co-working space. The room was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and my breathing. I opened up Zoom and watched the family join. Maddox, Mother, Aunt Dorothy, Cousin Jay. Jay looked nervous. Aunt Dorothy avoided looking at me too long. Mother stared at the ceiling. Maddox cracked a joke. "Well, look who showed up. Finally acting like you've got a backbone, Nevaeh." His tone was mocking. Judas' laugh hidden behind a smile. I ignored him. I had prepared. My voice stayed steady as I said, "You've taken control of everything. But some things you cannot alter. Truth. Accountability." I shared my screen. Voice recording first. Tape from motel. Emails next. "See this. June 15th, you asked Dad's nurse to change something. Hiding records." I could feel eyes on me. Laughter faded. Shock settled in. Mother's lips quivered. Aunt Dorothy shifted. Jay's face turned pale. It wasn't theatrics, it was exposure. I demanded that they stop twisting Dad's legacy, that they remove posts, retract statements, face medical records. I said I was launching inquiries. Maddox tried to cut in. "You think you can shame us?" he spat. But I held steady. "You're not the smartest one in the room anymore." Silence swallowed the call. Mother, who had been quiet, her face unreadable, spoke in a voice cracked with something between anger and sorrow. "There are things you don't understand about your father's last days." Her words echoed like a warning. I looked straight at the camera, at all of them. I knew my next move. I woke up to buzzing. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Texts, emails, missed calls. I hadn't even swung my feet off the mattress before I realized something was wrong, real wrong. The first thing I saw was a screenshot from a Facebook group, Cedar Rapids First Fellowship. It was a post supposedly from Dad written like some deathbed confession, said I stole from him, that I pressured him when he was sick, that I left him alone to die. The letter was fake, but it was written just convincingly enough to stir up suspicion. Beneath it, I saw Maddox's name in the comments. Heartbreaking truth. We tried to protect him. Mother shared it too, with a simple line. "Some stories are hard to tell. Please pray for peace." Dozens of shares, hundreds of likes. People who once hugged me after church now spat poison in my inbox. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. They weren't just cutting me out. They were burying me alive in lies. And now it wasn't just family, it was war. I called Benji that morning. He didn't need much context. "They went public, I go public," I said. He paused, then replied, "You want fire? You better bring water too. Facts, calm, clarity. That's how you win trust." I took his advice. Sat down, wrote an open letter, not some emotional plea, but a sharp, factual breakdown. I laid out the dates. Dad's medical state? Inconsistencies in the will timeline. I referenced my recordings. Didn't accuse, just told the truth in plain terms. I sent it directly to Pastor Lewis. He had known Dad since the 80s, baptized me, stood at my high school graduation. I asked him, man to man, to read it to the congregation if he found it credible. That night, I prayed without asking for anything, just sat quiet, hands together. I wasn't asking for favor. I was asking for fairness. Sunday morning came. I hadn't stepped inside that church in over 5 years. I wore the same gray blazer I wore to Dad's funeral. Still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. As I walked into the foyer, whispers bloomed like weeds. Nobody shouted, but eyes locked on me like I carried disease. I nodded politely, didn't flinch. Pastor Lewis approached, patted my shoulder. Good to see you back, son. And I could tell. He'd read it. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. The service started. Familiar hymns, the smell of perfume and old wood. When announcements came, Pastor stood still for a moment longer than usual. There's been pain in our flock, he said. Misunderstandings, family wounds. Let's remember, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. No names. But the tension in the room shifted like someone cracked a window. After service, I stepped out into the parking lot. The sun had just cut through the clouds. I thought I'd made it through. Then I heard her behind me. You really think this makes you a man? It was Mother. Her voice was tight, shaking. I turned. You humiliated us. You dishonored his memory, she hissed. I didn't back down. I'd practiced this. You buried me in rumors before you buried him in soil, I said. Her hand flew before her mind caught up. The slap wasn't hard, but it was loud. And public. She froze. Across the street, a neighbor had their phone up, recording. Her face drained. Mine didn't change. I didn't say a word. Just turned. Walked toward my car. My heart pounded, but my back stayed straight. I wasn't ashamed. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed again. A private message, from a woman I didn't recognize. Her profile picture was simple, no filter, just tired eyes. Message read, I was with your father in his last days. There's something you need to know. I didn't type back. I just stared at that photo and felt the ground shift beneath me. I arrived early at the church grounds, sunlight just reaching over the steeple. Organ pipes sounded faint inside, a low hymn under the sky. The lawn was already filling up. Neighbors I once waved to, friends who paused at my childhood home, Aunt Dorothy and Celine arranging chairs, Maddox leaning against a pillar. I stood off to the back, phone hidden in my jacket, heart hollow and pounding. I checked the folder under my arm, recordings, emails, old texts. I'd practiced this in silence too long to back down now. Celine walked up to the podium, polished as ever. Her voice carried across the crowd. Gratitude, praise, remembrance. On behalf of the Burke family, she said, your father loved peace. He loved family. She paused and read passages she claimed were his words, words about love, regrets, forgiveness. But some phrases were off, the tone, the timing, the choices of words. The dates didn't line up. I recognized them, phrases Dad never said, but ones Celine had edited into messages after rewriting them. A hush sank. People turned toward me, curious. I could feel my skin tighten. I lifted my phone, opened the live stream app I knew people trusted. I moved forward, stepping onto the steps beside the stage just as Celine lifted the printed tribute. My voice low but clear. This is wrong. These words aren't his. I held the phone high. I showed the recording I made at the motel. I displayed the texts with dates. The email where Celine asked Dad's nurse to confirm something he never affirmed. The crowd gasped. Some faces turned pale. Celine froze. Maddox's jaw clamped shut. Aunt Dorothy's breath caught behind her hand. You altered his messages, I said. You changed what he meant. You told people I abandoned him, but I begged him to speak. Pastor stepped forward, trying to calm things, but people were already pulling out their own phones. Murmurs spread among the pews outside. Someone shouted, "We deserve the truth." Another whispered, "I always wondered." Celine opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words felt real. Maddox's face was red. Documentary photographers from the local paper clicked shutters. Aunt Dorothy stared, mouth open, eyes full of something like regret. My mother stood quietly at the back, a shawl over her shoulders, lips parted. Her hands shook. I felt vindicated, not victorious, because nothing could give me back what was lost. But this was a chance to be believed. A small child's voice somewhere behind me asked, "Is that true?" And I nodded once. Quietly. The crowd didn't fall apart. They stayed. Shock settled. Exposure stung. But in that moment, the weight lifted just enough. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying every face I saw. I could see the lies fall in layers, but I also saw recognition. I didn't know if apologies would come. Didn't know if forgiveness would ever follow. But I knew I'd done something real today. Something no one could take back. I didn't sleep that night. The caregiver's message looped in my head like a ticking metronome I couldn't silence. "There's something your father left for you," she'd said, "but he didn't want anyone else to see it. It's in a bank vault." By mid-morning, I was standing outside First State Credit Union, watching her pull up in a beige sedan. She looked older than I remembered. Thinner, maybe, but steady. She nodded once, said nothing, and we walked inside together. I didn't ask why she agreed to meet. I think we both understood. This wasn't about closure, it was about truth. Downstairs, the vault felt colder than I expected, dimly lit. She handed me a small key and motioned to box number 1187. I slid it out, labeled on top in Dad's familiar print, "For the one who returned." I stared at it a long time before opening it. Inside, a flash drive, a folded letter, and a creased photo of just me and him, fishing, smiling, no one else in the frame. My fingers shook. The caregiver stepped back. "I was told not to stay," she whispered. "He made me promise. Whatever's in there, he meant it for you only." She turned and left without waiting for thanks. I watched the vault door close behind her, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. Back at my apartment, I didn't go for the flash drive first. I unfolded the letter. It was handwritten. Ink faded in spots like he'd sweated or cried while writing. "Son," it began, "I let them drive a wedge between us. I didn't protect you. And for that, I'll always be ashamed. I thought silence would keep peace, but it only gave them room to lie." He said Maddox had started changing the paperwork even before the hospital stays. That Celine had filtered messages between us, claiming I didn't want to speak, didn't care. He admitted he was scared, of conflict, of dying with more regret. Then came a sentence that stuck like a nail under the skin. "A good son doesn't need inheritance, he carries the truth." At the bottom, a strange phrase. Chestnut Hill, 04-22-98. A memory only I would know, my high school locker code. That was the password. I plugged in the flash drive. It took a second longer than it should to load. The screen blinked, then folders opened one by one. First folder, to my son. Videos, roughly recorded, webcam style. Dad, looking thinner each time in his study. He spoke directly to me. "I miss you," he said in the first clip. "They tell me you're too busy. I don't believe them." In the second, he tried calling me. I watched him hover over the phone, his thumb shaking above the screen, then pulling back. "I can't leave a voicemail." "What if you don't call back?" He wiped at his eyes. Another folder. What you deserve to know. PDFs, emails, scanned invoices, medical bills, months overdue. Celine had ignored them. Property titles, transferred under Maddox's signature while Dad was under sedation. One document had Dad's initials, clearly forged. Another was an email where Maddox pressured a nurse to skip documentation. It wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. But the folder I opened last hit me hardest. For Nevia's future. Inside, a PDF with account details, an untouched life insurance policy issued in my name. The amount wasn't big, but it was enough to move, to breathe, to cut the last string tying me to their table. Then came the final video. Dad's voice was weak, but clear. "You're not what they said. You're what you've survived. Don't let them rewrite who you are. You were always my son. I was just too weak to say it out loud. I sat still for a long time. No music, no lights on. Just me, that photo, and the sound of my father saying what he should have said years ago. And just as I closed the last video, my screen lit up with a breaking news banner. Local family inheritance dispute turns criminal. Investigation opened. I hadn't spoken publicly yet. I hadn't filed anything. But somehow, the truth had already begun to leak. The envelope from the courthouse came 2 days after the news alert. Civil inquiry. I was being asked to testify in front of a special commissioner. The videos, the documents, somebody had filed them. Not me, but the system had started moving anyway. I ironed my shirt the night before. Funny, the small things that make something feel more final. On the way to the courthouse, I drove past my old high school. That building still looked like a brick tomb to me, where I learned how to disappear before I learned how to speak. I parked around the corner, sat in the car longer than I meant to. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Maya Angelou's words rang in my mind. Not as a warning anymore, but a reminder that I'd already survived the worst of them. Walking up the courthouse steps, I wasn't afraid. I was just tired, but ready. They were already inside the deposition room when I arrived. Maddox looked straight at me, shoulders squared, jaw set. He looked like a man who knew the floor was cracking beneath him, but thought staring me down might hold it up a little longer. Celine, though, she couldn't meet my eyes. She sat with her purse clutched in her lap, knuckles white. The commissioner welcomed me and asked me to state my name. I'm Nevaeh Johnson, I said, son of Thomas Johnson. And then I told the truth, from beginning to end, not for drama, not to twist the knife, just the truth, clean, undiluted. I laid out how they'd shut me out, painted me as a threat, rewritten my father's final months like they owned the narrative. I showed the paperwork, the video clips. I told them about the call he couldn't finish. The room fell quiet. At one point, the commissioner asked to pause so everyone could breathe. Maddox shifted in his seat, eyes twitching with fury, but no words coming. Celine whispered something to her lawyer, her voice barely audible. Then I said this: I'm not here to watch them fall. I'm not here to ruin them. I want justice, not blood. I meant it. I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Afterward, my lawyer caught up to me outside, told me there wouldn't be a trial. A settlement was already being drafted, sealed, quiet, without court theater. They might lose the estate, he said. You can contest the will. You'd probably win. But I shook my head. I don't want anything they touched. It was a strange kind of peace. From the courthouse, I didn't go home. I drove out past the town's edge, parked near the overlook where Dad used to bring me when I was a kid. Just the two of us. Before the fractures. It was windy. I stood there for a long time. Don't let the darkness define your light, I heard him say in memory. I whispered, I won't. 3 days later, I signed papers to change my name, legally, from Nevaeh Johnson to Nevaeh Lightborn. No fanfare. Just a new page. It felt right. I wasn't erasing him. I was shedding them. I applied for work at a youth center on the west side, a place for kids who know how to pretend everything's fine at home. I figured maybe I could help someone not disappear the way I did. I rented a little cabin at the edge of town. Simple. Quiet. I kept only what I needed. No photos on the wall yet. Just light through the windows and space to breathe. I bought a journal. First page, I wrote the words, how I outlived my own funeral. Then I taped a quote to my mirror. Scars are proof that you survived, not that you failed. Last place I visited was the public library. Dad used to take me there when I was little. I found a copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, slid a folded note inside, signed it only N. On my way out, the librarian smiled at me, and as I stepped outside, I heard the final lines of that story echo in my mind. Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always.